We are not all that talkative.
Not yet. So I think we are online now. Welcome to today's fourth panel with the topic Holocaust and Film during the Cold War. As is the routine of this conference, I will give a brief summary of the three presentations, and then we will go right over to the questions and answers and discussions. I would like to begin with Bernhard Groß' presentation. He is professor of film studies, specialized in the visual aesthetics of cinematic media at Friedrich Schiller University, Jena. And the title of his presentation was Western European Film and the Holocaust. Bernhard Groß, because your talk is based on a still unpublished paper, I will not go into the details and only summarize the general argument of your paper. I hope that the questions will demonstrate to the audience how the point of view that you have developed in your work can offer a new way of looking at and analyzing Holocaust movies. You believe that the footages which the Allies filmed from the concentration camps after discovering and in some cases liberating them have been the raw material, so to speak, of cinematic Holocaust representations which followed these footages. However, you argue that these footages were modulated, so to speak, differently, depending on whether they were used by the Eastern or Western countries during the Cold War. So instead of focusing on the film narrative or on the content of the film image, as has been the case in research about Holocaust films by now, you suggest that we should look at the film technical means of communication. This method offers a new tool for understanding the different approaches of the Eastern and Western countries during the Cold War to the representation of Holocaust through the medium film. Further in your paper, you refer to concrete filmic modulations that can mark a difference in the Western and Eastern approaches. Here, I would like to highlight one of the outcomes of your paper, which creates a potential dialogue with the other two papers presented at this panel. And that is your thesis about the relation between the Holocaust reflections of Eastern and Western movies. You argue that due to the modulations used by the Western Holocaust films, Holocaust is treated in these films as a still unresolved past, which is still present in the contemporary life and which still needs to be dealt with. For you, this is not the case in the Eastern Holocaust movies, which treat the historical catastrophe as a closed and finished past. Whereas Bernhard Groß focuses on the bigger picture of Holocaust film in Eastern and Western blocs during the Cold War, Balázs Varga goes into more detail and devotes his paper to Hungarian Holocaust films at the end of the 1950s and throughout the 1960s. Dr. Balázs Varga is Associate Professor of Film Studies at Eötvös Loránd University. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. In Budapest, Hungary, and the title of his presentation has been Hungarian Holocaust Film in the 1960s. According to your presentation, Holocaust has already been the subject of filmic communication and representation in Hungary before the 1956 revolution. However, within the communist context of Hungary in these years, these films tended to reduce their topic to the oversimplified contrast between agency in the form of communist resistance and passivity in the face of fascism. You argue that this oversimplified conception of activity changes in the Hungarian cinema of the late 50s and the 60s due to several developments. These developments include the political and the film aesthetic ones, which came about simultaneously. In your opinion, the focus of Hungarian films in the 1960s is on the present, and they try to develop a critical national self-consciousness. For these films, the past is not a closed entity, but it is incorporated into the present. So the task of these films is to interpret the recent past to develop a means of present identification. You discussed that the Hungarian Holocaust films focus on the individual responsibility rather than thematizing the social responsibility and agency. Important motives in these Hungarian Holocaust films are remembrance, confrontation, and encounter. You argue that the movies of this time make encounter possible by displacing the characters both temporally and spatially and assigning them roles other than their real ones. In your opinion, mise-en-scène, flashback as a modern turn away from the classical and towards modern cinematic narrative, and the role reversal of the characters contribute to a new filmic aesthetic that can effectively demonstrate the emotional and action-related consequences of individual activity and encounter in Hungarian Holocaust films of the 1960s, and dig deep into the psychological complexities of this activity. In your last slide, however, where you present the results of your observations in a table, there is a movie which stands out because there are no role reversals in it, and it uses a different aesthetics, dramaturgy, and characterization to thematize the Holocaust, namely Cold Days. This movie, which will be streamed today evening at 6 p.m., is the topic of Rita Horváth's presentation. Dr. Horváth is literary scholar and historian, member of the Academic Advisory Committee of the Hadassah Brandeis Institute. Did I pronounce the name correctly? Thank you. At Brandeis University in Waltham. And the title of her presentation is Cold Days by András Kovác. This is a Hungarian film made in 1966. You have centered your talk on the movie Cold Days, which thematizes the Novi Sad massacre of the winter of 1942, where thousands of civilians, mostly Serbs and Jews, were brutally killed by the Hungarian army. In this movie, you explore the characterization, the psychological and historical aspects of the film as a historical document, and finally, the narrative techniques used in this film. The film is an adaptation of a novel written by Tibor Cseres, and Kovác, the director of the film, was most interested in the topics of individual human guilt, choice, and agency, while Cseres, the author of the novel, was more focused on the historical nature of the trauma. Hence, in your opinion, the film includes both aspects, and in this sense, it's a very rich film. This is a movie about Holocaust, and it is usually treated as a documentary, although it is not. Maybe because Cseres based it closely on the documents he obtained from the military courts during the trials, a widespread method of referring to Holocaust, as you argue. Furthermore, Cseres not only used the archival accounts of the trials, but he also interviewed the perpetrators as they were released from the prison in 1950s. In doing that, he also used oral history as a historical source for his novel. The movie is a classical chamber drama that mainly relies on flashbacks. The four people in the prison cell are incompatible with each other in terms of their military ranks, which leads to a grotesque dynamic between them. The movie also breaks up linear time, which is characteristic of the new wave cinema. This is one of the reasons why you see Cold Days as a representative movie of the Hungarian new wave cinema. So I have tried to keep my summaries really concise so that we have more time for discussions among the panelists, and then we will receive questions, if any, through the chat. Before I start with my questions, I would like to ask you to state any questions that you might have for each other. Bernhard, you have to turn on your microphone. And then.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much. I couldn't hear your introduction, but I thank you very much. It's a computer problem, live stream problem. Yeah, but I thought, I don't know, if it's quite well to start immediately in the middle of the thing. But I wanted to ask both of you, my colleagues, because it's you were talking in your presentations about the modernity or the relation between modernity and the Holocaust film. This was very interesting to me, and we just think we'll talk about the aspects of modernity in the film. The first thing that came to me was the question of the narration, or the new forms of narration in reference to modernity. And the first thing when I saw the film called Days from Kovác was that I saw the reference to a very famous film, Japanese film from 1950, Rashomon. And I thought, if it's known, the film is known, it became famous. It released in Hungary. I just saw it released in Hungary in 1959. So perhaps Kovác had the possibility 6-7 years to see it. Yeah, and that was my question, because Rashomon became, Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon became famous because it told us a story from different perspectives and the problem to find the truth. And that was really the nucleus of the of Cold Days, I thought. And so I wanted to ask you if you see, if you know, if it was known if Rashomon was known by Kovác, and if you see the relations. I see you agree, but yeah, I wanted to ask you, both of you.
Rita, would you like to start?
I think it would be maybe better if Balázs, Varga start, because I think we could get to the more specifics of the film, but this is the whole question goes to the whole New Wave movement, and not only that. For me, one of the most interesting aspects of Balázs Varga's paper was how he showed that this kind of time, thinking about time, non-linear time, flashbacks, this kind of fragmented narration is just at the whole horizon of thinking about traumatic past. And actually that is, he was referring to the pawnbroker, Sidney Lumet's pawnbroker, and so what I wanted to emphasize that this kind of cinematic thinking is, first of all, not cinematic, because it's in the literature they are based on. All these novels use this kind of, the pawnbroker does, the Cold Days, and Ferenc Sánta's 20 Hours. They already in the novels they have this kind of thinking about time. And when I wrote about this phenomenon, my major point is that why it became so overwhelming at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, of thinking about the traumatic past, is because that's how psychologically it's very accurate. That is how the past makes itself, breaks onto the surface of one of the victim's thinking. That's how these flashbacks are psychologically extremely accurate. These mini movies which our mind plays when it replays traumatic events, it's just really accurate. So it doesn't seem to be realistic, but this is the most realistic way of rendering traumatic events from the point of view of the victim. And all these movies are steadfastly focusing on the victims, even though they do sometimes on the perpetrators as well. But like the pawnbroker, which is, I think, an amazing film and novel, that's the first sustained concentration on the victim of the Holocaust, the novel and the film also.
So you would say that the perpetrators are actually the subjects of these flashbacks, and the victims are the objects. They're the topic of the flashbacks. So the perpetrators are the ones who are reflecting back on the victims. Or do you see this kind of a connection between the subject and the object of flashbacks?
Not
when
really.
You say that the victims
really,
are actually the main topic.
Not that what I wanted to say. The films do focus on the victims, and the victims get re-victimized and re-victimized by these flashbacks, by seeing the exact way their minds recorded a kind of a mini movie. That's how trauma asserts itself, so the artworks focus on the victims, and sometimes and the victims have these kind of flashbacks. Mm-hmm. And trauma, like in the cold days, the perpetrators do have flashbacks as well, but only in those cases when they are also victims, when it's traumatic for them as well. Those are when they can see flashbacks.
Yes, thank you very much. Balázs, Varga, would you like to make any comments to Bernhard Groß's comment on the similarities between Rashomon and Cold Days, or Rita's reflections on how flashback is a psychological means of working on a traumatic experience?
Yeah, I will try to do it shortly. I think the reference to Rashomon in Cold Days is quite explicit and important. And I think that's the broader context of Hungarian, Eastern European Holocaust films for the 60s. I mean, the European or global modernist cinema. And that is a movement, a cinematic movement, which began already in the 50s, but reached eastern part of Europe the late 50s. And as for the question, Rashomon was available in Hungary in a smaller circuit of cinemas or cinematheque, late 50s. Along with other new films of that decade, or early modernist or new wave films, such as Hiroshima Mon Amour, and French new wave films like Breathless. And I think one of the most important and prime context of new Hungarian films dealing with the recent past, be it the Holocaust or the Stalinist years or the 56 revolution, and the new modernist narrative techniques of nonlinear time fragmented narration was influenced by the European or global modernist cinema, from French films to Polish film school or the Czech and Slovak new cinemas. So perhaps only one more thing that I think one thing is so important in 50s and 60s modernist cinema, and that is not only the nonlinear structure, but the focus on mental states, which is a kind of turning away from the objective perspective and description of the social or historical realities. And that goes along with the question of subjectivity. And I think that's how and that's why we find at the focal point of these films questions of recollection, the special states of mental states from hallucination, memory, and that is how dealing with the past is at the one hand a personal journey, a mental journey, but might be understood as a collective understanding and coming to with the past.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments. I think Bernhard Gross has questions or other comments.
If I may, I don't want to destroy the whole structure. No, because you only one question to that. What you said. You mentioned the focus of mental states, and for me it was when I saw the film the first time a few days ago. I didn't know it before. I was wondering that the very special thing is that this focus of mental states involves the spectator as well, because I thought it was very strong kind of effective addressing of the spectator in the way we see a kind of a paradox. So we see the four people in the cell, the perpetrators in the cell, and it is a kind of liberation to see the flashbacks, to say out of the cell, not even this very reduction of everything, talking heads, white, and nothing happens in a way, and then it's a liberation to go out. But that what you see is the opposite. Because of this, I talk about a paradox. It's the opposite of liberation. It's to see the destiny of the victims and of the perpetrators as well. And so this is strange for us, that the strong effective addressing is that we can't hide away from the past, or from this problem that is told, from coming to terms with the past.
So you would say that the only means of liberation would be to come to terms with the past. That's kind of what the film implies.
No, there's no. I think for me, it's as you wrote, existentialist standing to say there is no solution. We as spectators, and in the end, there's no solution to say. There's no possibility to say, okay, the film is over, and take a beer and let things go. No, it's completely open.
That's also this discussion. Before everybody else comments on it, I will use this opportunity to also state one of my questions, because it exactly addresses this point, namely, how are the individual spectators of the movies engaged by watching these movies? Because in all of your presentations, there are the aspects, the psychological aspects, or the addressing of individuals. In Bernhard Gross paper, for example, the individuals are present in the movies, the addressees actually, as POVs. So the POVs of individual people in the film are shown, and then you can identify yourself with that point of view. Or the addressees of the movie, they are actually the main subject of Bernhard Gross paper, where he talks about the different modulations that the film uses in order to address them. And then Balázs Varga talks about the mental states of the film characters, their role reversals, and how they have to process that. In Rita Horváth's presentation about the cold days, you observe the individuals as subjects of reflection and remembrance. So my question was, can we hypothesize that these films are actually taking over what they would expect from their spectators? That are they trying to assist the individual spectators by actually reflecting on that past and somehow working it over? What kind of psychological role can these movies play? Because as Bernhard Gross says, after watching this movie, you cannot just go out and have a beer. It engages you mentally. It is as if it gives over the task of processing this past to every individual spectator. And you have to take this is your homework, you have to take it home and you have to work on it. And my question would be, do you see that as the purpose of these movies? Are they trying to help the spectators with the tasks of remembrance and processing traumata, which they either refuse to do individually or they cannot take care of individually? So can the film be a kind of assistance? How do you see the role of these movies, the Hungarian Holocaust movies, or the movies made in East and West Germany during the Cold War?
Should I start to answer, or
Please.
somebody else?
Yeah.
Sorry. It mainly depends. Who are you? What is your relationship to the recent past then and still? I think most of the people do have a kind of relationship with this traumatic historical events. And I experience this a lot when I am teaching, for example, in Hungary, Holocaust literature. And then I had to do that at the same time to try to shield some of the people to get my students to get too involved, to get hurt. And on the other hand, to expose others to certain types of knowledge, images. It depends. And it's very difficult to do that at the same time. But it really depends, where do you stand as a member of the audience, I think.
Thank you. Are there any, yes, Balázs?
Yeah, I think, so I see a dynamic or an ambivalent dynamic here, because take, for example, Cold Days. So I think there's a clear gesture of involvement and identification. And I think subjectivity, mental states, memory positions are serve this kind of involvement of the audience. So that's a kind of direct address. Step into the memory, step somehow into the that kind of retrospective position. But, and there's the ambivalence here. On the one hand, I think also in Cold Days, there are stylistic tools which somehow distantiate past and present. Take, for example, the situation in cell when the contrasts are quite high. I mean, the black walls and the black white walls and the black uniforms, and consider the events at Novi Sad in a foggy winter day. So there's stylistically the contrast. I mean, here and now. Here we can and have to watch, see, or understand clearly in a contrasted way things, while in memory or in the filmic reconstructions or recollections of the things as they happened, it's not that clear. Plus, I think, and for me, it has also with importance. Almost all of these Hungarian films dealing with the past, not only films dealing with, for example, Holocaust, but films dealing with the memory of Stalinist years or the revolution, use a dialogic or a multi-plot narrative structure, which again might be understood as presenting parallel and different understandings or positions, for example, ethnically, socially, based on class, like in the case of cold days. Four people are here, and they represent quite different perspectives in terms of their past, but in terms of their knowledge, agency, and social background also. And besides the involvement and address of the audience, these films might somehow show that although, again, referring to Rashomon, there might be some kind of truth. I mean, what happened with the Major's family, for example, in the case of Cold War, but there are different meanings, different understanding, and different personal stories behind it. And I think this dialogicity is again a kind of modernist tool, and that's novel character or aspect of Hungarian or Eastern European films dealing with the Holocaust or the recent past.
So you would say that the audience left over with an unfinished picture, which they have to complement in their own thoughts. So depending on which point of view they want to take and how they would clarify the images, how they would finish the stories which are left unfinished or untold.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have received 2 questions in chat, but Rita, Horváth, if you would like to comment what Balázs Varga just said, please go ahead, and then I will.
Yes, I just want to say that this is even more complicated by the fact that whatever Balázs Varga said, it's absolutely the case. And on the other hand, there is this age-old technique of the investigation to involve the readers and not the readers, the audience. And of course, this is also in the other movies, in many of the other movies which he discussed, that there is this investigation, and the audience gets involved on the level of finding out and being invested more and more to find out what happened. And after that, when the audience finds out before, but in the case of Cold Days, simultaneously almost, and then to see what are the results. And it's again this claustrophobic thing what Bernhard said, that this paradox, which is, I think, is very good way to think about it about all the aspects of the film. And actually, I wanted to ask Balázs Varga about excluding this film from. I think the framework he built is is really important. Is really informative. It has a really good structure, and I don't see why to exclude Cold Days. There is a role reversal. The perpetrator becomes a victim, and this role reversal structures the story. And I wouldn't have concentrated. I was concentrating on role playing as an existentialist central theme, but not as role reversal, which connects, I think, fantastically with all the other films. That's all.
Thank you. Balázs, Varga, would you like to answer this question? Or
okay,
this comment?
try to do it shortly.
But please shortly. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I see parallels but differences, and I think, what you mentioned is right. Still, I think if there is some change or role reversal in Cold Days, but not in a sense I wanted to apply or understand the other films, because from my perspective, what happens in Cold Days, and especially in case of Major Buki, is that the film shows how he and all the other characters cannot leave their personal perspectives. So you are absolutely right that there is a reversal in roles as victim or perpetrator, but not in a sense what happens in other films when physically have to change roles. I mean, the protagonist in Szabó's film Father, or in the case Late Season, when the perpetrator or the collaborator protagonist in a lucid dream finds himself in a gas chamber turned telephone booth, which is quite an absurd situation, a grotesque situation. So that's why I think that and try to show in my table that we can compare, but still there are important differences between the use of that trope.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have received 2 questions in chat. I will state the one first, which addresses all of the panelists, and that is, it's a question of the mediality of works that refer to the Holocaust as a difficult past. And the question says, where would you see, for the purpose of our conference, a difference between films and books in engaging the audience with a difficult past? So I don't know if it's a question about the extent to which these two different media can engage the audience, or the techniques or modulations, as Bernhard Gross would call them. What do you think? Bernhard Gross, please.
Well, I would argue that the most important difference is the way of addressing, and as we said, for example, for Cold Days, I think we just talk about the narration. We refer to Rashomon, but as Rita said, obviously this technique origin of filmic idea by origin, but it is a technique of literature. But the difference for me is, in this case, Cold Days, as I said before, that there is an immediate addressing of emotions, effectively addressing. That means, beside of the topic we're dealing with, in this case of Cold Days, we are in a way in the same, the film puts us in a situation as a spectator, not in a way to say, think about perpetrators and victims, but to see that the perpetrator could be a victim and otherwise. And so it puts us in a situation to feel it. Even if I don't understand the film, in a way to say, to know exactly what happened to Novi Sad. But we are involved in the duration of the film more and more. I speak about Cold Days, more and more to this this situation that we can't, that we find no solution. That there is no way out. And this is, for me, the difference. This is a special thing. This means, for me, in this case, the mediality of film.
So that would be something that the medium film is capable of doing. But how do you see the role of literature? Do you think that literature has also has similar means of putting the reader in the place of the victim perpetrator roles, so that they really feel themselves in that situation? They feel like they are now in the position where they have to make decisions, make choices, or act. Or can the literature do the same thing? Or do you think, and this is a question for everybody, do you think that the literature can do it differently with other means than the filmic ones? Rita, Horváth, please.
Well, my answer will be a little bit like not addressing the core of the question, so later on let's do that too. But what I want to say that Cold Days is a very special movie for me, because I think, and that goes the closest to some kind of a solution, that it's an analytical tool. The film itself is like a workshop, working out how group testimonies can work, how we can get to facts, how we can identify victims, how we can identify historical facts, mainly on relying on connected and also disconnected and fragmented testimonies. And that mechanism, it's also a vehicle in the movie to not to get to have this professional tool, and developing this professional tool, it's in a way provides us with an escape from the other implications. On the other hand, and it's in the book as well, but in the movie, it's much more central, is the role when, again, another role reversal, but of course there are not three roles: the victims, the perpetrators, and obviously the bystanders. And the cashier, when she steps from a bystander, she steps into the role of the actual perpetrator for a while, which she recognizes as that. And first she panics, and then she runs away, and she processes. And because she is standing on a really clear moral world of her belief in a God, in a world of godly justice, she understands how she crossed this line very clearly. and she understands what happens to her as a punishment, while the Tarpataki, the person who took on her offer to help, because her reasons were noble in the beginning. She was scared that they are taking away these innocent people. And during perpetrating, during making the selection, she realizes that now she is taking on the role of God, and of selecting who to live and who to die. And to have this, not one of the perpetrators who get tried in the trial, but to a completely innocent and dead, victimized bystander, it's again a very subtle move on the side of the film.
It's interesting that you also mentioned the trials. Katharina Rauschenberger has written a comment here in chat. She has written, maybe you should broaden the context and ask about the difference between films, books, and trials even. So trials are meant to come to clear, explicit facts, but films sometimes do the contrary. Yes, Rita Horváth.
I just want to say that exactly from this point of view, the works of art close this gap. Most of them do feature actual trials, most of them actual investigations, actual criminal investigations. So I think the works of art themselves try to close this gap.
Thank you very much. Any other comments on this topic?
Perhaps a short comment on the possible differences between novels, books, and films. That it's quite obvious and important. I mean that these Hungarian films or Eastern Europe films could reach a much broader audience than the books, which were, for example, Cold Days. I mean, the novel by Cseres was published in quite a high number, but could not compare it to the almost million viewers of the film, which was multiplied when it was screened on television in the 60s. So I think the public outreach of modern Eastern European films and their impact has to be mentioned also.
Thank you very much. Another question from YouTube addresses a different context that was not mentioned in any of the papers discussed here. In your papers, you discuss the aesthetic differences between Hungarian movies, Rita Horváth and Balázs Varga, that were made before and after the revolution. Bernhard talks about Eastern and Western Holocaust movies in a broader European context. And the person asks the question, aside from the political or the political aspects that played a role in the forming this specific aesthetics of these movies, do you see a dualism, capitalist, socialist dualism in the production of these movies, which has contributed to their aesthetics and to the way they deal with the past? So has the production also played a role in these differing aesthetics? Or do you think that these differences mainly stem from more political contexts? So the way the movies were financed, Bernhard Gross?
Well, to say it in general, I think it's very difficult. I just have an example. A film of the early post-war situation. It's called Morituri, a German film about, in a way, the first German film that shows a concentration camp, the first German feature film that shows a concentration camp. This film was made by Arthur Brauner. He was lead the production and financed the film. Arthur Brauner was a victim, a Polish Jew, and he could hide. It's not really clear, but he always said he could hide in Poland so that he wouldn't have been deported. And so he came to Germany in 1945 and developed. It became the most important feature film production in the from 1950, another 45 to the 90s in Western Germany. And he tried to make this film. And the first thing he did was to go to the Soviets, to the so-called Russian zone. And they were really impressed by the treatment description, because of this was very important. The Jews, you see the concentration camp, it's not named, it's kind of ideal concentration camp, and it's a full of a international bunch with Jews and communists and the whole bunch of nationalities and so on. And this group has a possibility to leave the concentration camp and then hide in the woods in Poland and survive the war. And there the internationality is the most important thing, not to refer especially to the Jews and their destiny. And this was for the Soviets very important, because and so at the beginning they said, okay, it's a good treatment, do it for us, for the so-called DEFA in the GDR. And then he made with a director, they made the screenbook, and then the Soviets said, oh no, this is there are too many problems, too differences, too many Western allied are in the movie, the persons and so on. And then he came back to he went, I think, to the French zone. They didn't want to make it, and in the end, to shorten it, in the end he made the film, I think, in the just not no more sure, I'm no historian. I always forgot the details. I think in the American zone he made at least the film, and then the film, no, in the British zone, sorry, it's released in Hamburg in 1948, and it was a completely flop. It was just the presentations were destroyed and fighted against them. But so you can see there is, at least in the first years after the war, it depended on many little questions of ideology, questions of possibility to realize it. And I think this is more or less for the Eastern Germany. It became in the 50s more clear because of the structure of the DEFA and the hierarchy in the DEFA, and in West Germany less, because there were no interest or central interest in the production, central interest to make special films. So yeah, so about this.
So in terms of the policies that played a role in financing and producing the Western or the Eastern movies, we always return to the political factors which were in play. So as I deduce from your answer, you can never reduce these different approaches towards financing different movies with different aesthetics and different approaches to depicting the National Socialist crimes as the dualism between socialism, capitalism, but rather the very differing and sometimes very multi-layered interests and policies they play a role in. So this kind of reduction to capitalism, socialism will maybe not work when focusing on these movies. So we have received some more questions in chat, but we have only 5 minutes left. There is a relatively long question. I think it will take me 5 minutes to read it out loud for you. So maybe if you can also see the question in the chat, maybe it was sent by email. I don't know if there is a possibility to answer to it per mail as well, but yeah, we also have a relatively long comment. I'm afraid because of the shortage of time, we cannot tend to these questions or comments, but I would use the 4 remaining minutes that I have to ask one of my short questions. And that is, I came to this question when I watched Cold Days, because at the center of this movie, there is a massacre of Serbs and Jews. And I was asking myself, what do we mean when we say Holocaust films? So are these movies that specifically thematize the Jewish victims of fascism and National Socialism? Or are these movies that tend to the atrocities of these fascist regimes in general? And if the former is the case, are there any movies that specifically concentrate on the Jewish victims of National Socialism, which can be referred to as mere or pure Holocaust movies? We need a very short answer to this question because we only have 3 minutes. Rita, Horváth, please.
Just a very short answer, because I know what I think, and I really want to hear from the others. That I just wanted to emphasize that this way of thinking about the Holocaust in the late 50s, early 60s or 60s, this seems like a general layer of culture. I don't really see a huge impact going from the works of art of Western or Eastern being on not the same side of the Iron Curtain. They are using like Hungarian TV movies based on TV drama is based on a French material. It's connected, and you can see that from the prizes these movies won. Like the first 2 TV dramas about the Holocaust, they both won really prestigious prizes in the Western world. So I don't think they did speak the same formalistic language. They all participated in trying to understand what happened. And there was something else, but I forgot. So
Thank you so much. I think that fits very well into our timing because now we have only 1 minute left. Thank you very much. Thank you for the attendance in the Zoom meeting, the people who followed us on YouTube. Thank you for the questions and comments. And of course, thank you all the panelists.